Okay, and we can only focus on the part that's relevant to the validations. So basically, we can only cover the parts that's necessary or needed to create validation with bGalite. And there's lots of parts we all have to left out just because of time constraints. Okay, and if you've done and worked with them before, which is only a few of you, and you will find this relatively easy. Okay, and it can be slightly more difficult. And if you've never done any web development before, and if that is the case for you, you probably need a little bit extra time after the class, just do a bit more practice, just to understand how the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript works. So obviously, just by listening, you can have an idea, and you would get much better understanding if you actually do some exercise just by writing some code yourself. I'll list something at the end of the lecture and kind of resources online that you can use. There are many, many resources online because that's one of the most popular languages, and usually, and how do I say, in the sense, it's quite easy to learn and beginner friendly. So there's lots of resources online. Okay, and first we're going to start with some kind of background or concept relating to these web developments, and then before we actually look at the specific code. And so there are actually 3 languages. Sounds like a lot, but actually each of them is much simpler than, say, one language, like, say, Python or Java. So the first one is HTML, and it's designed for content. It allows you to add things like text, image, and videos. And obviously, for this module or coursework, we can only just look at the text, so how you can add text to your page. And the second part is about CSS. That's about formatting. That's about changing the font, color, or layout. So these are applied to text or image or video. So you can change the font, color, or layout of the text. And for the images, you can change the layout or change size or change positions. And similarly for videos. So that's done for CSS. And then finally, that's JavaScript. And it's designed for interactivity. So for example, you can add things. If you mouse over a button or menu, it's going to get expanded or change color. Okay, and the important things to remember here is, JavaScript is not Java, and they share some syntaxes, because when JavaScript was initially created, Java was very popular, so they decided to follow some of the same syntax as Java. But the two has diverged quite a lot since that, which is about more than 20 years ago now. Okay, and these are not full-blown programming languages. For example, HTML can only do text, image, and videos. It can't do any computation whatsoever. So it does not have, say, arrays or if then else or any of these things. These all come in JavaScript. So as a result, they are much easier to learn. They're quite straightforward. Okay, and then the other advantages is actually they are designed for presentation, and so which leads to good looking results. So HTML CSS is particularly designed to present things on the web page, and over the years, more than 20, 30 years now, they can present things and looks very nice. Whereas things like Java here, and it's not really designed for presentation, it's designed for computation, or in other words, mostly for the backend, the part user don't see. So the front end it creates doesn't look that nice or that easy to create. Okay, I'm going to start with the first part, which is HTML. So let's say this is a simple web page, and the HTML defines its structure, which I'm going to skip that part, and describe its meanings, tells the browser what each part are, and then define its content. So the meaning means, okay, it tells the browser, so this is the title of the page, this is some headings, this is some text. And the content means, okay, the text there says CMT23171 web development is the actual content, which is the text that should be included in the heading or the title or the page title. Okay, and the 10, so it can have text. So we get all these different texts there, but it also sees all different text. You can see that's the title of the page, the headings, some extra paragraphs of text here. And it can also include reference to other files. So these are more commonly known as links. So you can have these links, which links to other pages. And you can also actually link to images, audios, videos, and SVG files, which are image files, a typo. Okay, and this is something actually quite important to remember. We said an HTML is used to include, and besides text, say images and videos, but the files, the image and video file itself is not stored inside the HTML file. It's not like a Microsoft Word. You can add a picture and the picture becomes part of the Word document. Whereas in HTML, you can add a picture to your page, but the picture itself still remains a separate file. And you just only add a link to that picture file in the HTML. It tells the browser where to display the picture, how big that is, and where to find the picture. Okay, and we're not going to use any of these for your coursework. It's not required, so it should be okay. And you can also link to style sheet, which are including the CSS rules, which is for formatting, which is to say set font size, background images, colors, etc. And then JavaScript files. Okay, so JavaScript files is where bigger light code will come in. So this is important. So we're going to do some very simple JavaScript programming. Okay, and so you always need an HTML file, and you can't have JavaScript or CSS without the HTML file, so always need that. The HTML file itself and is just basically text. And so you can basically edit it with any editor, so that I can edit the text. So it's different from, say, Microsoft Word documents. It's actually not a text editor. So the text file, the examples you had was something with extension called .txt and something you edit in Notepad. That's a text file. And it can be used on any browser, so long as it's a platform had a browser. So Mac, Windows, and Linux on your phones, so long as it has a browser, it can see or can display the HTML code. And also all the source code is available. And again, this is a bit different from, say, normal programming. If you run, say, Microsoft Office, you will not be able to see the source code. But if you use anything that runs in the browser, all the source code will be visible. We're going to see some examples later. And it usually has two views, and one is called the rendered view, and which is what you see most of the time. So this is a web page, and if you click, and that goes to the actual web page, it looks slightly different now. So that's called the rendered view. And the other one is called source code view, which is the code that used to create this page. Okay, as I said, all the source code is always available. So if you want to see the source code of this page, and all you need to do is just right click and choose view page source. This is in Chrome, and for any browsers, it has this function. Okay, and then it will show you the code behind this. So obviously there's quite a bit of code behind of this, and you can do this on any web page. Anything you run in the browser, you can do this and see the code. Okay, next part. Okay, this is just still the same example talking about two views, and this is a, where's my browse? And this is a very simple web page, one of probably the simplest. You have a title, you have a picture, and the paragraph text. So that's what it looks like in the browser, and this is the source code. And the much simpler source code, you can actually put everything inside as a picture, similar size as well. Okay, so hopefully you can still read the text. And this is, and talking about, so this is what the HTML code would look like. And it has two major parts. And the first part, or the top part, and it's called the metadata. So these are the information about the page itself, like character encoding, the author, and something else. None of these will be displayed in the browser. And then you also have this part, which is inside this body tag, which is actually the content. So that is defines, say, the titles, the pictures, and the paragraphs. Okay, so there's the metadata part and the content part. We're gonna see that in a second. Again, just very quickly, can you see the text inside of the box here?
Yes, Professor.
Okay, and it might be slightly small if you're using like a laptop. And okay, let's talk about metadata. So these are the things. So the first line of code says doc type, and it says HTML. So basically it is declares, say, this is an HTML document. And more importantly, it says this is using the HTML version 5, which is the latest version. Even though you don't see 5 here, that's implied. Okay. And then we have this part, the red one, and which is title, and that displays, that sets the title for the page. But the only thing is this one is not in the displayed on the page. Actually, it actually shows as the title of the browser window or tab. Okay, and it's quite useful. For example, if you save the page or bookmark the page, that will be used as a text for the bookmark. And the search engine also interested in this quite a bit. And so I didn't have an example here. If we look at this example here and open this page, okay, and so you can see, and this is the one very similar to the one we showed here. It looks slightly different because the paragraph itself, it changes with, depends on the window size. And if you see the source code, let me just put it next to it. Okay, and you can see, so this is the part we have been talking about, what we said called metadata. And so this declares it's a HTML document, and you need the HTML tag. That's the indicates the start and ending of the page. And we're going to come to about these tag things a little bit later on. Yeah, maybe actually I should talk about that earlier. Okay, so let me stick it back here. And so this is basically how HTML language works, and it introduces a number of things called tags, and it has predefined names. So you had HTML, you have head, you have meta, you have title. These are all tags. The usually way these tags works is you have a starting one, and then the closing one. And you can see this by, say, the starting one, they would have exactly the same name. And the only difference is the ending one would have a slash before the tag name. So you have this like an angle bracket, head, closing angle bracket, and then finish this here with an angle bracket slash head angle bracket. Okay, and then inside the starting or in between the starting and ending tags, you can have other things. So the HTML is like the root tag or root element. So everything else is inside HTML. So you have this starting here and ending here. So everything else on the page should be in between the HTML tag. And this is something called elements and some extra attributes you can set about a tag. Here, what it says language equal to EN, stands for English. So that sets the language for the page. And this is useful, for example, you might have a Chinese page or I don't know, a German page. You can set as different languages here. And so inside HTML tag, so in between this and this, we have a pair of head tags, and which is for the metadata. Okay, so the head indicates the metadata that is not shown on the page. For example, it sets the character encoding to UTF-8, and which don't have time to explain, but usually useful to include. But also, you can have set something like title, and that's the starting title, and there's ending title. As we said, this will be the actual text of the title. So this one tells the browser, I want to set the title of my page. And this part tells the browser what is the actual text that is, okay? And the only thing we need to remember is this title here is not the title you see on the page here. You can see certainly they are different as well. So this is blue flags and with actual more formal name. Okay, this is what displayed here in the title bar or the tab bar. That's what it is. Okay, that's what this title says. And we can change it, and then it will change the title as well. So the easiest way to do this is actually using something called developer tools, and which again comes with the browser. And if you right click here and choose the last one, which is called inspect, in say Chrome, it might be in Firefox, it might look slightly different. And we recommend using Chrome for everything in this module, and give you something like this, which actually shows you the code. And you can, when you mouse over different parts, and you can see which that part is, get it highlighted on the page. So when I mouse over HTML, it highlighted the entire page because that's including everything on the page. And when overhead, nothing is highlighted because we said this is a metadata part. It doesn't really show anything. And then the body, and the body shows, okay, that's the body, and you have this border shows, and the orange box shows the border for the body. Okay, for now, we're just interested in head, and we can see it sets this and the title, and title is this text here. Okay, and then we can change this just by double click, and we can change to something else. This is a new title, and if I press enter, you can see the text here changes now to say this is a new title, and the text might be very small, but if you try it on your own computer, and you should be able to test that. And you can test other things as well this way. And the thing to remember is any changes you made this way, it's not saved. So when you refresh the page, and it's all go back to what it was before. Okay, so it's good for you testing something out, but not really for code, editing code. Okay, so that's a very quick introduction about the head part. And then the actual content, as we said, these are the things which you actually see on the page is in between the body tag. Okay, that's the important part. So if we look at our example here, we have the, and also you have this little triangle in front, which allows you to collapse or expand. So this is quite useful, especially when there are lots of code. You can see this body part includes everything that's going to be displayed. Again, so that's a fixed tag. You have to use body to tell browser, say, these are the things we want to include on the page. And we can ignore the article tag for now, but this is one of the first one you will see. And you can see this one is matching to actual the title here. And so it's used a tag called H1. H stands for heading, and the 1 means level 1. That means the top level heading. And then the text in between is what the text get displayed here. Again, you can start to change to something. For example, I make it something generic. I change to page title, and now here it changes now. Okay, so that's H1, which gives you a level 1 heading of the page. So if you think of, say, you're writing a report or a thesis, and the title for the entire report or thesis will be H1. And this is the second, another tag, and which is the image tag, which is IMG, which is shorter for image, which give you this picture here. And the most important thing is here, you have to specify where you can find this file. As we already mentioned, the image itself is not saved inside the HTML file. Then you have to link to the file, which is the src attribute. And what you need to remember here is, here it only has no file path, only a file name called blueflags.jpg. That means this file has to be in the same folder as the HTML file. Okay. And finally, we have the P tag, and which stands for paragraph. And you can see that give you this a paragraph of text. So that's what P stands for. And if you expand, you have a little bit more text inside there. So that's first line of text. And this gives you something which is italic, or properly this EM stands for emphasize, and a little bit another line of text. And this is give you a link. And finally, more text. Okay. And you don't have to know these details, but if you want to just look them up, and you can see, essentially just know, use EM for emphasize the text or italic by default, and A is for link, stands for anchor. But most importantly, just need, okay, if you need to write something, just use a P, which allows you to put some text as a paragraph. Okay. And the other thing, and it's quite useful to know, is when you show the code like this, you have space in front of a tag. Say for this line, it has this amount of space, this kind of space, and for this one, it has even more space. Okay, so when you should add the space is when if it's inside another tag. And so in this case, the article is inside the body. So the article itself will have some extra space in front before it starts, just to make it visually to see the article is inside the body. And this space does not change the code. So whether you have the space or not would look exactly the same in the browser, but it's for us humans easier to see. And then this one, this is H1, which is this H1 we had before here. And it's again inside the article. That's why it has further space in front to indicate, and this is inside article. But for this one, which is the image, and it has the same level vertical as H1 because, and it is not inside H1. You can see the H1 starts here and finishes here. So this image itself is not inside H1, so there's no extra space in comparison to H1. They're at the same level. Similarly for the P, which is for paragraph. So the paragraph is not inside image, so they're at the same level. So this way, visually, you can very easily see, okay, and there's body, and you had the article inside, it starts from here, and inside the article, you have these three other things. They are at the same level, not inside of one another. Okay, and we're going to talk about the elements or the tags, which we already mentioned. So as we said, we have the start and end tag. So here we have example, which is called EM. This is a starting tag, and this is the ending tag. And we already see many other examples in the code. We saw H1, we saw article, we saw body. These are all tags, and usually they all start with a starting tag and an ending tag. And you can have a tag with nothing in between, just a tag itself. That's also possible. Or you can have a tag like this, and which is an image, and it does not have a closing tag. Instead, it just have a slash and anchor bracket at the end. Okay, so instead of have EM something and then slash EM to end it, it would have everything in one tag, essentially a starting tag, but ending with a slash there. Okay, and I already mentioned inside the tag. Okay, so the inside in this case not means in between the tag, but actually inside the starting tag. So not in between, but inside this pair of angle brackets, you can have some values which are called attributes. So this is a tag, and inside this tag you can have some attributes. This is REL, media, HIF, etc., etc. And these attributes can have values you can set to them, depends. And usually these are predefined values you can set. Some cases you can change that to anything you want. Okay, and if we look at our example here, so we have this HTML, which is a tag, and this LANG is a attribute. You can see because it's inside the starting tag. It's not in between the starting and ending tag. And it has a value called EN. And okay, so this will be a typical tag with a starting and ending and some text or content in between. Yeah, similar here. So the image is the most common one, which was without an ending tag, you probably should have a slash at here to close it. But if you don't have, then also fine, it still works. But this is the one which has multiple attributes. It has SRC, stands for the source, and the width and height. And for these ones, and you can basically use any values. So the source, you specify the actual image file. So it can be anything. And for the width and height, it can be any numbers. It specifies the size of the picture. Okay, and then we already seen the headings before. So we said here, and you can have this H1 heading. So that's the level 1 heading. The actual text of the heading, you just put it in here. I call it page title. And if you refresh, it goes back to what it was before. And you can go all the way to 6. So each level is smaller. So H1 is biggest, H2 is a bit smaller, H3 is even smaller, and H6 will be the smallest. Okay. So here, if you look at this page, so this shows you two levels. You have one H1 and two H2 level. So this will be H1, the biggest, and this will be H2, the medium, the second largest. And I could, for example, I can change here, say to H3. And you can see this becomes slightly smaller. And if I make this smallest to H6, that's the smallest. And they still look fairly big and here. And that's only just because the page is really zoomed in just to make it visible. Because if you look at it, say, can I just add something? No. If you just add a simple line of text, that'll be quite big as well. Okay, the next useful element is called the P, which is paragraph, which stands for a paragraph. So you can write some text in between. So that's when you need to add more than one line, which is some text. Usually, if you need to add text to your page, just use paragraph. Okay, and so you can also make it bold or italic using strong and EM. Okay, these used to be B and I. These are no longer recommended. Recommendation now is to use strong and EM instead. Strong give you by default, give you a bold, and EM by default give you an italic. Okay, and you can also make some lists. Let me see. I think probably the easiest thing is to show you how this works and in live. So what I'm going to try to do now is I'm going to use a editor called Visual Studio Code. We're going to introduce more in the lab how to use it. And for now, we're going to just create something very simple. Demo. I already have a file here. I've done that before. Okay. Let's do a different one and file open. Okay, that's better. Okay, and this is maybe the most important thing. It says, and old HTML file and ends with .html. Okay, because that tells the systems or the file browser that's an HTML file which they can use. Okay, and here is where you write code. This is basically just so the first thing is you do. I forgot now actually. Look at you do doc type HTML. You need to type that one. Doc type HTML. Okay, and then you need HTML tag. Okay, so that's starting and closing one. And for the HTML, then you need head, which is the metadata part of your page. And then you have body, which is the actual text that you want to display. And now I have my page, but we don't have anything there yet. So I'm gonna first, I can save this and I can display the page. Let me just move this one a little bit. I think I can make this one smaller. Okay, and so this is actually the page I just created, and which has nothing there yet because I haven't added anything. And the first thing we covered today is title, and that gives, again, it does not display anything on the page. It changes what gets displayed here. I just call it demo page. I just got a demo. And if I save now, and this is very difficult, I assume it's very difficult to see. And here it's now actually changed to demo. And because it's very small, so you can't see it. And then now inside the body, we can start adding, say, this is something we covered. It's a level 1 heading. So I just call it title. Okay, and then I save, and you can see this is our H1 now. And then I'm gonna do another simple one, just a paragraph. And this is my first paragraph. I save. Okay, and you can see that is there now. Okay, and obviously you can add other things like pictures and lists, etc., etc. Okay. And then you can use strong for bold and EM for italic. So let's say this is my, so let's say I wanted the my be italic. So I just put EM around my. Let me just close this down. So you can see you had EM starting and closing, and the my will be somewhere in between. And if you save this, you can see that my here becomes italic. Okay, and for example, I wanted to make the first bold, so I put strong here. It automatically creates the closing tag for you. It's easier to see this one. And so you can see I had the strong and the first, and then closing one. The first will be in between, and that's why the first here becomes bold. Yeah. So, and you can also add links, pictures, and other things. We don't really have that much time to cover, so I'm going to skip most of those. Okay. The next thing we mentioned is list. And so these are like the bullet points you have in Microsoft Word, and it can generate it for you automatically in HTML. In this sense, you don't need to say add the dot yourself. And first you need OL, and which stands for unordered list, which created bullet points. And for each bullet point itself, you need to use RI, which say that's a list item. That's what it stands for. Okay, and so I'm gonna do some simple example here. So inside the body and after the paragraph, I'm gonna do an OL first. So that's, as I said, that means unordered the list. And then I do RI, which is the item. I might my first item, and I save. This is what it looks like. Sorry. Yeah. So this is OL, so it stands for order the list. So actually that's give you the numbers instead of a bullet points. That's why you see the number here now. And you can do another one, say my second item, and if you save, and you can see that's the text there. All these numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., will be generated for you. You don't have to type them. My third item, and maybe do one last one. So that's give you that. And finally, you're gonna introducing something called unordered list. And it's similar to the previous one, and except instead of OL, you use UL, stands for unordered list, ordered. O stands for order, OL stands for ordered list. Okay, and then for each items inside, you still use li, so it will give you bullet instead. Okay, so here I'm gonna just be a little bit lazy. So instead of making another list, I'm gonna just changing this OL to UL, which stands for unordered list. And when I save, you can see on this side now, there's no longer numbers, they just dot points now, because that's what this URL gives you. And everything in between just remain the same. You don't have to change them, any of them. Okay, so that's all we're going to cover in terms of HTML. Oh, okay, and there's one last thing, and it's called generic containers. Okay, so this is something a little bit difficult to understand. And because this is something which does not make any changes to the page, because if you add them, the page doesn't change. And the only thing it's used for is to group things together. That's all it does. And so in a sense, like say, if we look at the code, and something like a body is like a container in the sense, if you have body, it does not add anything to the page, but it allows you to group these things together to show, okay, these are the things I want to add onto my page. And sometimes you want to do finer groups than that. Say, don't just say a group of everything. This is where the generic containers come in. So the thing you need to remember is called a div. And that is the thing that we use to create a groups or generic containers. Okay, and it doesn't really do anything. So for example, I might want to group the paragraph and the list into one group. So what I need to do is I need to put a div before where the groups I want to start, and I put another one after or where the group finishes. Oops. Wrong one. Okay. So you can see now I created a div here and I close here, and I had inside the div I had the paragraph and an unordered list. Yeah, and if I see my page, if I save the page now, oops, so I save it here now, the page itself doesn't change, it's still exactly the same as before, but to the code it's slightly different because it's now, it has a div and these two are grouped together. And then later on, if you want to make changes, you can make some changes to the div which will apply to everything inside here. Yeah. And so the most common thing you would do is you would add an ID attribute to the group, a div, so you can refer to it later on. And so the ID itself is kind of like the attributes we talked earlier. ID is an attribute, but it's a special one. It gives the element a name. Okay, so if we see this example before, so we can have these kind of attributes, and ID is just a special attribute, and it gives a name to something. So I can say ID equal to, I don't know, my div, and that's a terrible name. But then later on, and you can refer to this particular div with this ID, because on the page you can have multiple divs or multiple paragraphs. And if you want to refer to a specific one, you can just use the ID to refer to that. Okay, and now that's everything in terms of the HTML. And next, we're going to covering very quickly about CSS. And you actually don't need to use CSS for the coursework, but just for completeness, we'll have a couple of slides for CSS. And CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. And it's used to change the appearance of the page. And so currently the page looks like this. That's what we created. For example, the font, the size is all choose by default. These are the color of the text. And these are all the things you can change. And you change this with not within HTML, but using CSS. Okay. And you can do this using a separate file and then link that file to the HTML file. We're not going to do that. Just for this, we're going to do a simpler way, which is just to put the CSS formatting rules and inside the HTML. Okay, and the way it works is by creating rules. The rule says, okay, I want to set the color of paragraph, the text in the paragraph to blue, for example. That's a rule. And if you set that, then all the matching elements, so if you have more than one paragraph on a page, all the text will become blue. Okay, and so this is what it looks like. So in this case, it says H1. I want all the H1, its color set to red. So the color here will be by default, which will be text color. So the H1 here is called a selector, which decides which element or which tag in HTML gonna be the rules gonna be applied to. So the color is the formatting property you want to change, and finally the values you want to set it to. So the color by default will be black. So if we just want to set it black, you don't need to change anything. But if you want to change to any other values, you need to use CSS like this.
They're all outside.
And you can apply multiple rules in between the same pair of curly brackets, something like this. And you say background is yellow and text is red. And for these, you need semicolon at the end. So now it's the end of each rule. So it knows that's one rule and that's the second rule. Okay, so I'm going to do a simple example now. As we said, we're not going to create an external file and just to make things a little bit simpler. So one way you can do is you can use a style tag inside the head section. Okay, and then you can add in your rules. For example, the rules we just said before. We said H1, the color to red. So you say H1, and you need a pair of curly brackets. And you say color to red. Okay, and there's a small thing here. For example, all the spellings here has to be American, not British. So you can't say COLOUR, and it's probably not going to work. If I save now, you have this little curly line underneath. That means the browser detects as an unknown property. And if you see here, and it actually doesn't change. So you have to use American spelling everywhere. Okay, now you can see the title becomes red. And you can add the second rule, says background color is yellow. Okay, this is not going to look very nice, but it's something you can do and test. So background color, column, yellow, semicolon. And you have this little box here. It's not part of the code. It's automatically generated by the editor, just helps you to see the color. And if you save, I can see, okay, the background of the heading becomes yellow. Not particularly nice. Okay, and the other thing useful to know is this applies to all the H1 in your page. And for example, if I add another H1 to my page, And let's say this is the second title, and I save. You can see this is another title showed up, and exactly the same formatting rules will be applied. Okay. And sometimes this is not what you want. And then you can be more specific about which one you want to format. And this is where the ID comes in. Okay. And you can say, I want to these formatting rules only apply to this ID or element with this ID name. So the symbol you need to use is the hashtag. Okay, and let's, for example, if we give this h1 a ID, and that's called main title, okay, then I can change my formatting rules. Says I don't now only want to apply to this one. So instead of using h1, I'm going to have to use a hashtag. That means whatever follows is a ID. And in this case, it will be called main title. That means I only apply this one to the element with the ID called main title. So if I save, okay, misspelling. Main title. Okay, you can see only this one get formatted because it has an ID called main title, which is referenced here. So the main thing you need to remember is you need the hashtag. So first you need to define the ID, and then you can refer to with the hashtags in the CSS, or later in JavaScript, it's the same. Okay, again, we're gonna skip this part. And there's different ways you can add CSS to your page. We're showing the simplest way, just using a style in the head section. And then the rules, just as what you would cover, I would see in the examples. Okay, yeah, and this is embedded head style. So you have the styles in between the head, and we have different formatting here. In this particular case, it adds some formatting to the image element. That means all the images on your page. So the border will be 4 pixels wide, will be solid, and it will be red color. By default, there's no border to any pictures. Actually, I can show you what it looks like. So this is what happens. You can see these pictures now have these borders, which are solid, red, and 4 pixels wide. And again, you can confirm this by turn on the developer tools, which is the inspect. I'll put it under below. Okay. Maybe still side will be better. Okay, so this is how you decide where you want to put the developer tools. And so this is a separate window. This is left, this is bottom, and this is right. I'll make them a little bit smaller, so at least you can see. So you can see that's the picture. This is the first one, which got highlighted now with an orange box. But also you can see this one here shows all the formatting rules applied to this image currently selected. And this is the formatting border 4 pixels solid red. And some other attributes in terms of the height and width. Okay. And so you can see this little box here. And if you untick, it will show you, okay, when this rule is removed, what it will look like. So you can see now these are the two pictures without any borders, how they look like before. And if you click it again, and the border is back. And in this way, you can easily see the impact of the rules. And there's the second picture, which is got highlighted here. I can't move the mouse cursor away, otherwise I'll remove the highlights. Again, you can do the same thing. You can remove the rules and just see what they look like. And okay, I'm going to skip these parts. The other things might be useful. Again, it's, as I said, for the coursework itself, you don't really need to use any CSS formatting, but you can align text, and you would use something like text align, and by default will be left. Then you can change this to center or right. This is only for text, not for pictures. So if I do very quickly here, back to our example, this is our demo. For example, maybe I want to align the title of this one to the middle, and just add one more rule. I will say text align. The value is center, and I save the page. I can say this is now in center, and if I resize, it moves. Yeah, because I only applied to element with this particular ID, so only this heading is affected, other thing not. Okay, and you can also set the size of the text as well. We'll let you to play with that and don't have time to cover. And finally, you can change to different colors. You can use things like this, or like a names, or you can set values like this. Again, we didn't have time to color. I mean, even just use color names. There's a lot of different colors names you can use. Okay, and finally, we're going to come to the JavaScript part, which actually is the most important thing, because we're going to using JavaScript to create the validations. And so the JavaScript, in a sense, is more like a proper programming language, in the sense to have variables, has expressions, has for loops, or maybe and some even functions and objects. And none of these exist for HTML and CSS. Okay, and so you can declare variables in JavaScript. These are used to store values. And the thing unique about JavaScript is a variable does not have to have a type. And if you use something like Java, and you might know, say, for a variable, you have to say whether it's integer or float or a string, etc. Whereas in JavaScript, you don't have to. You just say it's a variable. So in this case, you will say a variable, the variable name is called the scoops, and it's used to store 10. So by default, and JavaScript will treat this as a number. But this can be a string, or say even an array or object. It doesn't matter. You don't have to say what that is, and you can change on the fly. Okay, and these are some expressions. And we already saw expression here, say scoops equal to 10. So give the value 10 to scoops. And this here, and it's slightly complicated in the sense, this is not, say, obviously this is not equal, but what it is happening is and take the value of x, multiple by 1, and then give it to x. So that essentially means by increase the value of x by 1, if that makes sense. Okay, and so they have to end with a semicolon. So and the double slash is a comment. That means something that will not work. And this column, quote, makes a text. So it can be single or double quote, either is fine. And then you can have Boolean values, which are true or false. Okay. So to add JavaScript and to an HTML file, you can use the script tag. And either at the very beginning, or sorry, either at inside the head or inside the main body, either is okay. So actually, we will need you to use both. And in our case, now we need some script tag in the head but also some script inside the body as well to show the validation. They are for different purposes, which we'll see a bit later. Okay, and so we can add. So that's a simple example. This is maybe it's already a little bit too much here. Let me see how much time we still have. Okay, I can see. Okay. Okay, let's just go follow with this example then. And so here we'll try to show you something using a method called document.getElementById. So the document would refer to the HTML page itself, and this getElementById is a particular method. And as you probably guessed, the name tells you is you can refer to an element by ID and then followed by the actual ID. That's the entire page, and this is a particular method. We give you element, and that should be the name of the ID. Okay. And if we use our own little example, and we can add some script, and here you can either put the script tag here, or you can put it inside the body. That's okay. Okay. And let's say, and inside you can say document.getElementById and followed by ID. In this case, we want to, for example, this one. This is the ID we want to get to. So we say main title. Okay, and usually you will define the variable. I call it title. Okay, and then this document getElementById would refer to this h1 because it has a matching ID, and then inside the code, this can be referenced using title now, right? Because the title is equal to this. So this one would return this element, and it's now saved as title. And maybe the important thing to remember here is, and this title is not referred to the text here, it refers to the entire element. So it's an element, not just the text. Maybe I'll just call it title element. Okay. And then you can make changes to this. And you can say dot in the HTML. This way, it will change the text. So dot in the HTML essentially is changing in between, whatever in between the starting and closing tags. So for example, here I can say title element dot in the HTML equal to, now I maybe some new title. Okay. So I want to change the text, this one to new title. Okay, but if you run this now in the browser, okay, so you can either use some tools or you just need to manually refresh, and you can see the title itself and doesn't change. Okay, and the reason of that is because we refer to this element before it is actually defined. So basically the way that JavaScript works is to run it line by line. So in this case, it will run this first. And then when it's run this line, this h1 line or line 23 hasn't been run yet. So we don't have an h1 element with the ID of this yet. So if you say here, I want to refer to an element that's ID called main title, and it doesn't exist. So later on, if you want to change this HTML, it will not do anything at all because the element does not exist yet. Okay, and so the way to do this will be, the simplest way is just to move this code to the end of the body. So this way it makes sure that element is already created by the time you run this JavaScript code. So now it will do all these first before it comes to the JavaScript, and it will find main title element, and then we'll change this. Okay, so if I save this one now, you can see on this page, now the title changed to new title. Yeah. So always, if you need to refer to something on your HTML page, always put the script tag after the HTML elements is defined. In this case, so long as the script is after h1, after this line, then it will be okay. And usually it's safe just to put it at end of your body code. Okay. So there's other ways, more complex ways to do it at the same thing, and which we're gonna skip that part. Okay, and we're gonna use the last bit of time and to talk about something called the JSON data format or JSON object. So essentially, and it's just an object. The concept object is the same as other languages. That means it's a more complex data more complex data type, and it can have properties and names and values in a JSON object or just JavaScript object. So you can have the property called first name, and you can have the value called Chantanya, which maybe makes sense to you, and then in terms of Indian name, and last name, which is a property, and its value called Singh, and age 28, and you can add more as well. Okay, and this is very commonly referred to. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's used a lot to pass data between the front end and the server, especially the web pages and the backend databases. Okay, and it's a common way to, for example, if you want to store the information about the person, and you can have multiple properties and their values. Similarly, you may want to store all the information about the visualization. You can use similar notations. You can have different property for the visualization and set its values. That's essentially how Vigolite works. And all Vigolite is just one big JSON object. And inside it has many predefined properties, and you need to give them values. And then Vigolite will take those values and create a visualization for you. Okay, and so I'm going to show you something and very quickly now. So I can define this in my JavaScript code, something similar to this. I can now define a variable called person, and it's a JSON object. Okay, so the first thing you need to remember for JSON object is start and ends with curly bracket. Yeah, so that's the important thing. And then this will be your property and value. Okay, so Kai is my name, so I put it there. And I'm using quote. So JavaScript knows, okay, this is a string. And you can't just say Kai without quote. Until you can see this will give you an error. It's not complaining yet. Interesting. And you need to end each property value pair with a comma. And have other values And for example, I'm 20. Obviously, that's not true. Okay. So once you define this, okay, I'm gonna put it here. So I'm gonna define this one first. What you can do, you can use this. For example, here I'm changing the title, the text to new title. That's pretty fine. But also I can potentially just change this to person dot name. Okay. So here, person is this object, and dot is a notation. Say I can refer to one of my properties, and this property I can refer to is this one called name. Okay. So now instead of setting the title to new title, it will use whatever values you have here to set. Okay. And if you look at the page, okay, you can see it doesn't work because you can't. It doesn't know this is a string because we don't have the quote. And again, if you turn on the developer tools, you can see now, and there's this cross with 1. That means you have one error, and you need to go to the console, and you can see that the error here, it says uncalled references, chi is not defined. Okay, so it's thinking, okay, maybe chi is a variable or function or something, but it couldn't find it because I didn't use quote. So it doesn't know it's a string. So instead, I'm going to make this a string by put it inside the quote, and then I save. Okay, so you can see now there's no more error here, and this is now changed. Okay, so this is how you define a JSON object, and you can have different properties, multiple ones, but usually mostly just say either text, sorry, either numbers or text. Yeah, and you can have more complex ones, you have array. Oh, okay, the most complex one is you can have another JSON object as the values of the property. So let's say for this person, it has a property called address. Address itself, its value is a JSON object again. Then you can have, let's say, city is London, and the country is UK. So in this case, the address itself is an object. If you want to use this, what you need to do is say, you have to say person and then dot address. That means I'm gonna refer to this object, and then I'm gonna use its one of the properties. Let's say dot city. So now, okay, it's already saved. You can see now this one changed to London because I'm using person dot address, oops, dot city. Yeah, that's how you use. So that's a JSON object, and that's how you use it. Sorry, just refer to, and you can also do other things. For example, you can say and person dot address dot city. You can change the value as well to, I don't know, and Paris. And here, because it comes after this, it changed the value of city now to Paris. And later on, when we set that to the title of the page, you can see now that goes to Paris. Or maybe I change that to some number, 2021. Okay, and it becomes 2021, but that's not the best way to do it. Okay, and yeah, we also covered this one as well, called nested JSON object. in a sense, and you can have the value of a property itself as another JSON object, and that just becomes this is something actually you're going to see a bit more in the Vega Lite, probably the most complex things. So for the object, you use curly bracket, starting here, ending here. And then for the name, you don't need double quote, but I think in the Vega Lite, you need double quote as a property name and as property value. For property values, use double quote for the text and no quote for string. Here is what we treated as string actually. Okay, and this is the last slide. So this one, I give you some resources, and if you've never done HTML before, these are the things you used to know. And so, okay. So these three comes from an online website called Codecademy. It has some interactive lessons, allows you to practice. And so this one is something practice HTML. And so this part is free, so you can go through this, you can click start, and you have to log in first. I think if I'm logging, it will not becomes okay, it still says nothing. Okay, that's good. So on this side, it tells you what is HTML and the things you need to do on the middle part. And in this case, this will be the task you need to do. And you need to do something and then click run. And if it's well, it will tell you, yes, you completely succeed. And you will see the results on this part. And if you didn't do it correctly, then you will not see the correct results. So for this part, it has some text to explain to you what is HTML. And what you need to do is in the code editor, which is this part, type your name in between the H1 and then press run. So they have the H1 here already. I just need to type in my name. And I click run. This one will show up, says correct. And I can go next. And they can explain a little bit other things. Okay. So this is one good way to learn by practice. Okay. Have a few more minutes. And then these are the other ones and from the same website. So this second one is some exercise about basic related to CSS. There's some lessons there. And the final one is some lessons on JavaScript. So these are all JavaScript console, comments, state types. Yeah. So the most important thing is probably in terms of the object. That is something quite useful. It not allow me to go there yet. And you have to finish the previous one before you can go there. You can see here in terms of, yeah, objects or topic and something there, which is actually very important. Okay. And then there's another resource which I mentioned here, and which is called the Free Code Camp. And it's something similar to this, and which is called Codecademy. And for Codecademy, there are many other lessons, and not just say HTML and JavaScript, but also there's many things which are not free as well. And only I think the most basic ones are free. For example, this one says learn responsive design. it has this little pro sign before. That means these are not free, you have to pay to get it. And for the free code camp, and it's something similar, but it's completely free. There's nothing there you have to pay, and it has everything you need to know is probably under the first tab, which is called responsive web design. And we're not going to explain what responsive is, but you just cover, for example, the basics HTML will be quite useful, basic CSS, and maybe you don't want to do the applied visual design yet. And there's quite a few in terms of different CSS things. And then the useful part is maybe the JavaScript part as well. These are things similar to what they covered in the Code Academy, but a bit more in depth. Okay, and so you can use either of these. And what they covered is kind of similar, but free code camp would have more. That's freely available if you want to go into more depth. And if you only just need to cover the basics, and either the Code Academy, or the free code camp would work. Okay, and we will stop there.